thinking I want to touch on something that I may have discussed in a previous podcast. I just want to reiterate again. I got a huge response when I created a Facebook post, and I'm going to read it to you. This was in December. I said, I'm thinking that it's not necessarily your fault if you carry more body weight than others. What if you're overweight because your body is better at making fat than a skinny person? 60,000 years ago, 60,000 years ago, this would have been a serious advantage when people needed to survive a cold, foodless winter. Would the skinny person have survived? Possibly not. This is the basis of my next podcast on See Your Toes Again, which I hope to publish later today. I'm not creating excuses for you being overweight. I'm hopefully creating a reasoning that will help you understand your own circumstances better. So here's the question then. Is there something metabolically about the overweight person who's been overweight all their life compared with the lean person who's been lean all of their life? And most of us would know some family member who is bigger than other family members, or alternatively a lot skinnier than other family members in their family, in their immediate family. So there's got to be potentially a difference. Can it just be that the overweight person is just naturally lazy? Let's face it, that's the general consensus, that if you're overweight, you should just eat less, exercise more. Or the other nugget of knowledge, of course, is that your calories in have to meet the calories out, and if those two differ, then you're going to get big. Which suggests that the skinny kid somehow is maybe a bit too slow to get to the dinner table, whereas the big kid always managed to get there first. I doubt it. I've seen skinny kids that can eat their way through quite a bit of food and stay skinny, and I've seen big kids who eat bugger all and get big. So here's the thing then. What if there is a metabolic reaction, and what if that metabolic reaction is pretty darned easy to find and therefore pretty darned easy to fix? Now we're talking. So, my name's Pete Robin. I'm from See Your Toes Again. I believe this is podcast 11. I've only been going a couple of months, hence the small number. But generally, my podcasts are designed for generally men in their middle age who are, the best way to phrase it is, who are unhappy with their current metabolism. It could be that they've got excess weight. It could be that they're looking down the barrel of diabetes or high blood pressure or heart disease or a heart attack, and that's pretty bloody common these days in middle-aged men. So that's why I wanted to create this podcast, so I can get normal middle-aged men and get them to understand what they can do about their health to make themselves a lot healthier and therefore reduce the risk of these sorts of metabolic diseases. So let's get on to it then. If there is a difference, what could that difference possibly be? Now, I've been reading a book which is all about diabetes, and it's quite interesting because, it's interesting for me. It might not be that interesting for your average person. The book is all about diabetes and the relationship of insulin, because as most of you know, if you're a type 2 diabetic or a type 1 diabetic, you're likely to have insulin as one of the methods, if not the method, to control, especially type 1, to control your diabetes, which controls your blood sugar levels. Now, in a person who doesn't have diabetes, insulin is released when you have high blood sugar. So, let's go back a step. In a normal situation, when you haven't had any meal, you haven't had a sugary meal and so on, your blood wants to stay at a particular blood energy level. It just wants to stay at a constant energy level. It doesn't want to have too much blood sugar, which is called hyperglycemic or hyperglycemia. And it doesn't want to have not enough energy or blood sugar, which would be called hypoglycemia. Now, hypoglycemia, of course, the lower one, when your blood sugar gets too low, is what type 1 diabetics dread the most, because they can send them into a shock. So then that's when they need to gouge down some really sugary foods to snap them out of that and bring their sugar levels back up in their bloodstream. But we're not type 1 diabetics, we're normal people, supposedly. So if your blood, I get so confused with this sometimes, if your blood sugar levels want to remain constant all the time, just the same as your body wants to keep your blood temperature the same all the time. Your body doesn't want your body temperature to swerve all over the show. It wants it to keep nice and constant, regardless of the external temperature, regardless of you running 1,000 meters as fast as you can. Your body wants to maintain the same temperature. That's why you sweat when you get too hot, because your body's trying to maintain its temperature, and why you shiver when you get too cold. If, incidentally, I know I'm drifting here, but if you were a reptile, a cold-blooded animal, you wouldn't have that problem, because your body would, when people say you're cold-blooded, it doesn't actually mean that the reptile, like a snake, is necessarily cold-blooded. Its blood could be warmer than yours on a hot summer's day. It's that it's basically variable, so it varies according to the temperature of its surroundings. But we're not reptiles, we're human beings, we're mammals, and mammals have to maintain a fairly strict body temperature. And it's the same with blood sugar levels. Our bodies want to maintain a fairly strict blood sugar level. So when you go and have a sugary meal or anything with it, it could be that can of Coke, it could be a meal full of potatoes and pasta and all sorts of stuff, it could be that pizza. If it's that pizza, by the way, it's probably not all the fat in the pizza, it's the carbohydrates in the pizza which get broken down in your stomach into sugars. They create a sugar spike in your bloodstream, and at that stage, assuming you've got a healthy pancreas, then the pancreas will release insulin, because the insulin will notice, or the pancreas will notice, that you've got an elevated blood sugar level. The insulin will be released into your bloodstream. It will grab all of that excess blood sugar, and it will take it to the liver, and the liver will convert that into fat, body fat. And that'll be taken away to wherever it wants to be stored, which, if it's a bloke, might be your belly. If it's a woman, it might be your bum. Or if your belly and your bum are full, I'm sure there's plenty of other places in your body for it to dump. So that's the process that happens. And often, incidentally, when your insulin has stolen all of that blood sugar out of your bloodstream, that's when an hour or two after you've had that nice sugary meal and you felt bloody great, then you get really tired, because your insulin has flogged all of the sugar out, and you can easily go the other way and end up quite tired and want to go to sleep, because your body hasn't quite got enough sugar in it. And that's when people will say, I can feel I'm low on sugar, I need to eat something. So they'll go and wolf down another Mars bar. I think I've said all this before, but it's always worthy of saying again, because what I'm talking here is the actual basis for people who put on weight, who put on body fat. It's not because you're eating fat that you put on body fat. It's because you're eating sugars. And that can be in the form of sugary drinks, sugary foods, fast-acting carbohydrates like bread and white rice and pasta, and spaghetti, obviously, same difference. And that pizza, like I just said, it's the gluten and the flour component of the pizza. It's not the fatty component. What else could do it? There's sugars in tomato sauce and soy sauce, and honey is full of sugars, and that fruit juice you've had thinking that you are nice and healthy this morning. All of these things will elevate your blood sugar levels. That will create an insulin outburst. The insulin will grab all of those extra sugars, take them to your liver, and convert them into body fat. So here goes back to my theory, and I don't think I'm the only one to have this theory. Apparently, the theory was initially suggested quite a few decades ago, and of course it was shot down by all of the people, including people like yourselves, and certainly people on my Facebook page who read it, because some of the responses I had were quite vehement. Including I was only making excuses for fat people. People just need to exercise more and eat less. You know, the same old, different day, same crap. Nobody really wanted to say, yeah, what an interesting philosophy. Now that's fine if you're a lean person and you've been lean all your life. It might even be fine if you were overweight and you've worked your ass off to get lean and healthy, and now you don't want to hear excuses made by other people. The problem is, or the thing is, I'm not making excuses for overweight people. I am trying to help overweight people understand what it is about them that makes them feel different, or what makes them basically put on weight differently from, say, their skinny brother or their skinny sister. Because I could imagine, I've never been one of those people, but I could imagine it would be bloody frustrating. So here's my philosophy, and like I said, I don't think it's just my philosophy. I think it is actually what's happening, is that if you are a naturally overweight person, it's because you have a pancreas and insulin that is quite reactive to your blood sugar levels. So as soon as your blood sugar level, even as soon as it gets a sniff that it's going to be elevated by anything, you eat that jelly bean, and your pancreas releases all that insulin. Your insulin races off, grabs that extra food, extra blood sugar, and races it to the liver. The liver converts it into fat, and the process has started. When you think of it, it could have even been when you were a baby, and with the lactose, which is the sugar component of your mother's milk, I have to be careful with that, of milk generally anyway, certainly of cow's milk and other things, is the lactose that's in cow's milk is a type of sugar, and that could possibly be the start of this. Your skinny brother, skinny sister, they have the same food, and the insulin and the pancreas aren't as sensitive to blood sugar, and they go, that's all right, I might leave it for a bit. And then once their blood sugar gets high enough, oh well, I suppose I should do something about this, releases some insulin, grabs it, takes it away, gets a little bit. Now here's an example. I was just at a conference last week. The people who I'm about to talk about would probably know who I'm talking about. There's one colleague who is, by his own admission, wants to put on weight because he said otherwise I'll blow away in a strong wind. Now he can eat and does eat all sorts of crap food. He eats lots of sugary drinks, lots of sugary foods. He has no reaction whatsoever. He's always been lean apparently, and he's certainly lean now. In fact, he said he eats more to try to put weight on. Now, there was another colleague who, when I mentioned this philosophy, got a little bit upset and said, no, it's all about just your calories in, calories out, and you just got to work hard. Because he showed me a photo of himself a few years ago, and he was quite large. And so then he thought, well, for the sake of my son, I'm going to lose weight and get healthy. And he worked really hard. He cut his calories down, exercised his ass off, and got lean. And he said, as soon as I have Christmas or anything, I'll put weight back on, and I have to work hard to get that weight back off. And therein lies the difference, is that the guy that was naturally overweight and had to work his ass off to get back down probably had quite an active insulin pancreas combination, and so as soon as he has any sort of food like that, sugary food, that insulin works hard and creates body fat. Whereas the skinny lean guy who wants to put weight on, he eats all of these sugary things, and his insulin says, yeah, whatever, it's not really worth worrying about, is it? And so he doesn't put the same body fat on. So there you go. It could be also that his metabolism might be faster, so he naturally burns it. But here's the other thing to bear in mind. While your body is creating fat, while it's putting fat on, it doesn't release fat. So your body will not put fat on and release fat at the same time. Now, if your insulin is naturally going to grab those sugars and convert them to fat and store them, but at the same time cannot release the fat, that would strongly suggest that the fat wasn't being produced in the first place. So where does that leave us then? It suggests, of course, that if you are overweight, if you have always been overweight and you've always struggled with your weight, then it does mean that you're going to have to potentially really work harder than your skinny sibling or your skinny friends to maintain the same level of body weight. But alas, it's not as difficult as you may think. What it does mean, however, is you have to be very careful with the foods you eat. So it's not about, I don't think personally it's about how much food you eat, but it certainly is about the type of food you eat. If you've listened to previous podcasts, you'll know that I do like to rave and rant about sugar, and for good reason. And this comes back to the diabetes book that I've been reading. It's really interesting because over the last several decades, since about the 60s, and I already knew this, but it was interesting reading it all again, there were scientists running around who wanted to figure out why there were more heart attacks, more heart disease, and more diabetes than there ever was in the past. This was back in the 60s. And so they decided, almost randomly, they decided to blame saturated fats, dietary fats. And they made quite a big deal about this, and I think it got to the stage where they knew that if they went back and said, well, actually, we're not absolutely sure about this, but we kind of have a hunch, then they would have looked a bit funny. So they were pretty adamant about it. There were no real trials done on this concept, and there have never really been any proper trials done on the concept. But because it's a bit like the lawyer who's the loudest in the courtroom got his way, there was kind of no defense lawyers that were able to be in the saturated fats corner. So the judgment was made that yes, we need to take saturated fats out of the diet. And that started off in America and went across the globe to all of developed nations, that we shouldn't be eating saturated fat because it's bad for us and it's going to give us heart attacks and heart disease and diabetes and obesity. So most of you guys, and certainly I, grew up in a whole generation and our parents' generation where we were told that don't eat fats, they're bad for you, and fats, dietary fats, will make you fat. We weren't really told that sugars would make us fat, and so this is the problem. Because as it turns out, saturated fats and fats generally have got nothing to do with obesity or heart disease or heart attacks or diabetes. And in fact, since then, there have been all sorts of trials that have been done to try to prove that saturated fats especially are the villains for all of this, and nothing has proved conclusively that it has any effect whatsoever. And that's quite upsetting for a lot of these regulation bodies, because, of course, they don't want to say, hey, sorry, for the last 50 years, 60 years, we've been telling everybody the wrong story, and there's probably been millions of people have died as a result of this because we told them the wrong information. So they're not likely to back down very easily. They would, at best, they might change the rules slightly to make sure that it didn't look too bad for them. Then, interestingly enough, we were told that we should eat more fiber. And in the process, that was actually designed to get away from the fact that they were starting to prove that the real culprit was sugar. In every society in the world, all of these diseases, obesity, diabetes, interestingly enough, they also mentioned appendicitis, which came as a bit of a surprise to me, but I guess it's down in the stomach there looking for trouble. If there's going to be trouble, it would probably find it. There were all sorts of complications and diseases that were popping up in countries that had never had any of these sorts of diseases, like a lot of the African nations, as an example, where they had been fine and dandy and not had any of these diseases for eternity, and then colonialism came in, as did the Western diet, and slowly, in fact quite quickly, a lot of these diseases started becoming apparent. A lot of the things like diabetes and heart disease take about 20 years apparently to really show up, and that's why type 1 diabetes is different, because that was always considered to be a child's disease, because it was the children that showed it up first, whereas type 2 diabetes came in when people were kind of in their 30s and 40s and 50s, and that's because they'd been eating this sugary food for a good 20 years before the problems showed up. And so a few experiments were done to show that sugar might be the culprit, but they didn't last very long because, and again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a conspiracy theorist here, but you've got the sugar industry have got a lot of money. You think of all of the foods that have sugar in them, you can understand that if you put all those together, and also you've got the fast release carbohydrates. So you've got all the bread makers, you've got all of the pizza makers, you've got all the cereal makers. Can you think of Kellogg's and Sanitarium and all of these massive companies that produce all of your breakfast cereals? And suddenly they're told, or the community as a whole is told, that their food is causing all of these diseases. So those sorts of sugar companies could easily spend a lot of money with a scientist and say, look, if you can prove, one way or t'other, wink, wink, that sugar has nothing to do with this, then we'll certainly fund your project and maybe also that new science lab that you wanted to produce. And so there were a few scientific experiments done that showed that sugar had absolutely no impact on diet problems and illnesses whatsoever. And as it has proven since, that they how do I phrase this, possibly weren't done with proper scientific foundation behind them. And then to get rid of some of the heat off sugar, that's when the big fad towards fibre came in, and we were all told that we have to eat lots and lots more fibre. Now, of course, that means lots of more vegetable matter, and it's starting to look now as if that was also another bit of a wrong turn, and as far that it may help us a little bit, but there's every chance that even all that fibre that we were told to eat might not really have a great deal to do with health at all. Whereas we were told if we don't eat fibre, we're going to get colon cancer and everything else. It turns out that colon cancer and other things like that, again, are very similar in they turned up in these places where they were never, colon cancer was just never happened in the African communities, and all of a sudden with colonial diets, colon cancer, well, not all of a sudden, eventually colon cancer came to become a big thing. So if they weren't particularly worried about their diets earlier and how much fibre they were eating, but suddenly they were told to eat lots of fibre and they still got lots of colon cancer, it's kind of like, well, maybe the fibre isn't the reason or the lack of fibre isn't the reason we're getting colon cancer. Maybe fibre doesn't actually have a great deal to do with it after all. So I think the moral of the story is, as far as diets are concerned, we've been led down the garden path a few times with scientists who have been clutching at straws, because through the entire last 100 years there's been a lot of a lot of research has been done, and we are not really very much closer to finding out the real problem to a lot of this. The one thing we do know, though, that is becoming more and more obvious is that sugar is the big factor in all of this. Take, for example, saturated fat. Let's get back to that. Saturated fat is animal fat. It's been in animals for millions of years. We, as humans, have been eating it for since we began. We're omnivores. We've been wrestling animals down, eating those animals, and eating all the fat as well. Yes, we might make some of that body fat from the animals into to smear all over our clothing to keep us dry, but a lot of it would have got eaten as well. And we had no problems back then with saturated fat. So why all of a sudden do we have to not eat saturated fat? Whereas sugar, where would we have got sugar from? There's only one time of the year, I've mentioned this a number of times, only one time of the year we would have eaten sugar, which was late summer, and that was from all the berries and fruit on the trees. We would have hoovered those down and got nice and fat for winter, which is, as the phrase goes, fattening up for winter. That's the only time we would have eaten them, because there wouldn't have been fruit available all year round. Where else do you get sugar? We weren't growing sugar cane back then. I doubt many people would have known what sugar cane was, and certainly sugar cane didn't grow all over the world. It only grew in certain places of the world. So even the likes of potatoes and stuff, tubers that might have resembled potatoes 300, 400 years, 1,000 years ago, may not have looked very much like the potatoes that we have at the moment. So they would have been pretty nasty tubers. And it was only when we started cooking our food, including cooking vegetables, that we could start cooking the shit out of the likes of potatoes and eating them. You find a potato in your garden or in the shop now in its raw form and try to eat it. It's pretty bloody disgusting. It's only nice because we cook the crap out of it and then we can eat it, because then it becomes digestible. So all that time ago, those thousands and thousands of years of our evolution, we never cooked that food. That's a fairly recent thing as well. And so we wouldn't have had the carbs from potatoes and stuff either. Might have had a few carrots and stuff, but they wouldn't have looked much like they do these days either. So therefore, we grew all that time with lots of saturated fat and no sugar, and then all of a sudden, especially in the 60s and onwards through to today, the saturated fats have been reduced out of our diets because we were told to, and the sugars have been steadily increasing all the time in our diets, not just from sugar, but of course from all of the processed foods that have got lots of sugar in them. So the moral of the story is, if you want to lose weight, the best way, or if you want to not gain weight, the best way, and proven to be the safest and most resilient way, is to try to get all of the sugar out of your diet. It's also been proven, a lot of people who have got type 2 diabetes, that if they get the sugar out of their diet, they can actually reverse type 2 diabetes and get off medication completely as a result. You'd want to try that, obviously, and you'd want to maintain your current medications until your doctor said, "Yeah, you look like you've switched this around. Why don't we reduce the level of your medication, and we'll see how you get on." So taking sugar out of your diet is a massive thing, and sugar is everywhere. If you can take the sugar out of your diet, then you won't get those insulin bursts, because you won't be raising your blood sugar levels. You won't get the insulin bursts. You won't have fat put on. Incidentally, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, happens when your pancreas has spent so much of its life over the last 20 years releasing huge quantities of insulin to try to control your high blood sugar levels because of all the sugar you've been eating, that finally you get to a stage where the pancreas is it's just like it's run one too many marathons, and it can't produce the insulin anymore, and so then you end up, of course, with elevated blood sugar that I believe ends up coming out your urine because it's got nowhere to go, basically. And that's diabetes. So Insulin is everything about all of this. Insulin is about you hopefully not yet having diabetes. Insulin is about if you keep treating it with lots of sugary foods, you're likely to become diabetic. Insulin is what is making people fat, and insulin is what keeps people thin if they know how to control it. So, that's quite a bit to think about. So if you control your insulin, you will control your weight. Assuming, again, you're not diabetic. And bear in mind, a lot of people in the world don't even know they're diabetic, and certainly a lot of them are pre-diabetic, which means that these symptoms are starting to happen pretty fast, and you really have to watch out. I think the ketogenic diet, which is knocking back on carbohydrates to a pretty serious degree, and upping you still need calories, you still need food, so your fat levels are your dietary fat levels are increased. That's where all of your food comes from, is dietary fat instead of from carbohydrates. I think that's all that's doing is meaning that your insulin levels end up being under control, because when you eat fat, like it might be olive oil or it might be lard that you cooked your food in, or it could be animal fat, the chicken fat, all that sort of stuff, then butter, cheese, then all of those fats don't have any, they don't make the insulin bounce. They don't raise your blood sugar levels, and so therefore you don't get an insulin spike and you don't put fat on. And that's why I keep saying eating fat doesn't make you fat. Eating sugar makes you fat. Eating sugary foods, and you got to remember then that carbohydrates, especially the fast-acting carbohydrates, they just get converted straight into sugar in your bloodstream, and so they will cause an energy spike as well and make you fat. So another thing to bear in mind with all of this is it would appear that if you eat too much protein, and you've got to eat quite a bit of protein to eat too much, then the protein will be also potentially converted into sugars. It can be broken down into sugary type foods, and that will cause an insulin spike as well. Now, by that, it means really a bit more, or about 40 grams of protein in a sitting. So if you read the label of your food and say you're about to eat a ribeye steak, then you have to make sure that you try not to get over that. If you want to be reducing fat, then try not to eat more than about 40 grams worth of actual protein. And in a ribeye, that might mean that, yes, eat the ribeye, but bear in mind that you'll be pretty much on the cusp of that 40 grams, if not slightly over. So then don't eat something else that's got lots of protein in it as well, because you'll be producing too much protein at that stage, or you'll be eating too much protein, and your excess protein that can't get digested has the potential to be converted into sugar, and that can be made into body fat. So bear that in mind too. Fats can't be converted into sugars, and so you're much safer with them. And that's where this whole that we have grown up with, where don't eat fats, they'll make you fat. We've all grown up with that for decades, and it's bloody hard to get it out of your head, because you're thinking, I better not eat that fat, I'm going to get fat. It's also counterintuitive that, well, I want to lose body fat, and one way to do it is to eat dietary fat. It's like, well, that doesn't sound right either. This is really important, and I'm sure I've nagged about this before as well. When somebody is dieting, I hate dieting. I don't particularly do it. I'll watch how much I'm eating, but I don't count my calories. I know other people do. So if you've decided that you're going to cut calories, and so you cut out all of your carbohydrates, I'm not eating any bread, I'm not eating any rice, I'm not eating this, that, the next thing, they cut all of their foods out, then at that stage, if they're not replacing all those cut out foods with something, then they're just not eating any energy food. And that's okay if you're in a starvation mode, but it's not going to be very healthy for you. If you want to keep looking after your body, then you need to still eat something, and it's fats that you need to eat. So the fats that you eat will become your energy source, and they'll keep you going. And ironically, I know that every time I reduce my fats in my diet and up my proteins, I don't eat many carbs anyway, so I up my protein, I reduce my fat, thinking this is great, I'm going to burn more body fat because I've reduced everything. I don't. I end up stalling. If you have stagnated in weight loss, if that's your objective, and you have watched out for your carbs, you're not eating your sugars, but you seem to be really stagnating in weight loss, chances are really high it's because you're eating a little bit too much protein and not enough fat. And like I said, that sounds really counterintuitive. But really, weight for weight, as in grams for grams, ounces for ounces, you should be eating about the same amount of fat per gram as you do protein. And that will keep you in pretty good weight, or slightly more fat than protein if you want. You still need lots of protein. I've nagged about that over and over. Every part of your body is made out of protein. If you don't have enough protein, your hair won't be good, your skin won't be good, your hormones won't be produced properly. Your body will really suffer. You've got to eat protein, but at the same time, you've got to eat fats, dietary fats, your butter, your cheeses, olive oil, olives, fatty fish. I like fatty meats. There's quite a few. Avocados, all that sort of stuff. You've got to eat those. Just eat them in moderation, but make sure you eat them. Eat a little bit on every plate you eat. Make sure eggs are great. Eggs are about 50-50, so fat to protein. So make sure whatever you're eating a fatty food as well as proteiny food. When I get back from the gym, quite often I'll be cooking tea in my air fryer, which I've told everyone is the best thing since sliced bread. I might be cooking some chicken thighs, boneless chicken thighs, or chicken wings, or chicken legs. Generally not the chicken breast, because it's not fatty enough. I don't eat turkey. Other people are going, I eat turkey because it's so low in fat. You see, it's because we've been indoctrinated into this low-fat campaign all of our lives. I'd better chop the fat off my ribeye steak. No. Eat the fat from your ribeye steak. It's probably the healthiest part of it. So you eat all those good foods, and just once you feel full, because if you're only eating fats and proteins, your body will tell you when you're full. As soon as you get to that mouthful where you feel full, don't eat any more, and then you'll start to lose weight. And you'll keep losing weight. I hope I haven't repeated myself too much, and I hope I do have, and I also know I bumble and fumble around, but I hope it's inspired you to think, okay, what I really need to do here is get sugar out of my diet. If I can do that, my insulin, and it's not just because Pete doesn't want me to enjoy good food, it's because if you can take the sugar out of your diet, you won't get insulin outbursts. Insulin won't convert that sugar to body fat, and I won't keep getting bigger. And also, because I'm not producing body fat, my body can then switch over to burning body fat. Because like I said earlier, your body can only do one or the other. It can either manufacture body fat, or it can use body fat as a source of energy, but it can't do both at the same time. It's like a factory is in production mode or get rid of it mode, but it can't be in both. The hormones don't allow it. In fact, I think insulin has got a lot to do with that as well. So if you could get rid of the sugar in your diet, also the white bread, as many carbohydrates as you can, to be frank. So all of your breads, your white rice, your pasta. It's been so long since I've had carbs. There's quite a few I don't even really think about these days. Try to limit your tomato sauce. Don't have fruit juice. Don't have any energy drinks that have got sugar in them. Go for the zero sugar soft drinks if you have to have them. Same with tonic, don't go for gin and tonic, go for gin and skinny tonic. Don't drink too much beer. It's full of carbohydrates, especially the draft beers and stuff. Apparently the lager isn't quite as bad. And see how you get on. Do that for at least a month and see how you get on. Weigh yourself, but also note where your belt is around your waist, and you may find you can reduce it by a few notches quite quickly. So I hope that's been okay. Enjoy, look after yourself, and stay safe. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.